Hey everybody, this is Adam. I'm coming at you with, wow, I think my first drawing video in quite a long time. Um, as you can see from the title, I am drawing Elaida from the Wheel of Time. Elaida do Avrini e Royhan, if I pronounce that correctly. Um, she's a really fascinating character. If you have only watched the show, you haven't met her yet, or maybe you have, which is kind of what this video is about. Um, But anyway, this is me doing some fan art of her, which I spend way too much time doing with Wheel of Time characters. Um, I'm not going to talk too much about what I'm doing in the drawing here. There's nothing, I'm not doing anything special in the drawing. This is just straight up a drawing on my, drawing and coloring on my iPad. And like I said, I don't use any special techniques or anything. Certainly, if you have a question about the artwork, you can ask me, but otherwise, I just want to talk Wheel of Time while this is playing and tell you about a little fan theory that I have. So, before I get going, I want to give credit to one of my favorite Wheel of Time artists. She goes by Meepo Draws on both Instagram and Tumblr. That's Meeppo Draws. And she does a lot of really amazing character work for Wheel of Time characters. Um, and my drawing here of Elaida is absolutely inspired by her much better portrait of Elaida, which you can find on her Tumblr account. I didn't set out to do a homage piece with this, but after I did the pencil drawing, I looked at it and realized that it was absolutely influenced by, her amazing drawing um, that I've just always loved, and it's always kind of stuck in my mind as Elida. So I end up just sort of, drawing this, and it has a very similar vibe. So you can look at the two of them, and you'll see what I mean. It's not, there's a lot of differences, but she really captured that sense of somebody kind of unhinged and losing their sanity. Um, and obviously it made a big impression on me and came through in this portrait. So anyway, if you like Wheel of Time fan art, Meepo Draws is one of the best. You should definitely check her out. Um, so anyway, as I said, what I wanted to talk to you today about was a theory about actually Liandrin in the show. She's played by the amazing Kate Fleetwood. Um, And my theory, just to put it right out there, my theory is that her character in the show is really kind of an amalgam of Liandrin and Elaida from the books, and possibly even mostly Elaida. I think that for a number of reasons. First of all, there is some precedent for this because in the show we have the character of Eamon Valda, who is the White Cloak, who's played really brilliantly. I can't remember the actor's name; it's escaping me, which is too bad because he does a really fantastic job. And it's a villain, the villain in the series that has really sort of spoken to a lot of people. He's just comes across as this really horrible character that's just incredibly well played. So he is named Eamon Valda in the show. Um, but he has some really significant differences from Eamon Valda in the books. Enough so that it's really a different, to me, it feels like it's a different character. He is a questioner in the show, which are sort of the Inquisition of the Children of the Light. They have kind of a military wing, and then they have this Inquisition wing. And he is one of the latter. But Eamon Valda in the books is very much part of the former. He is part of the military wing, and honestly, isn't terribly interested in the whole rooting out Dark Friends and Aes Sedai work that the Inquisitors do in the books. He's really just more of a military commander who's interested in power, his own power, but he's a much more kind of straightforward character. Much more interesting in the show, to be honest. Um, but he really, he's a sort of a different animal. I think the character that he most closely resembles in the books is a questioner named Asunawa, who doesn't show up until very late in the series. I want to say, I don't know, books 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. So it's very late in the series. At this point, in the beginning of the series, the head of the questioners is Jakim Carradine. But he's got a lot going on that, you know, the Eamon Valda of the show doesn't really feel like him either. So it's kind of a new character that's doing some of the things, some of the roles that other characters play, and some new things that are happening kind of just in the show, especially with hunting Aes Sedai, which frankly the White Cloaks in the books are not very good at. And there's not very many examples of them successfully kind of hunting an Aes Sedai, but obviously Eamon Valda in the show is pretty good at it, as a sort of collection of rings to show for it. So anyway, so what I'm saying is that we've seen precedent in the show where a character in the show can have a name from the books, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are that character, or that they're going to do the things that that character does. We know that there are a lot of changes in the adaptation. And so thinking of that, I'm really putting my money on this idea that the character of Liandrin that we see in the show is really going to match up much more closely to Elaida from the books than the actual Liandrin from the books. And as I said, I have a couple of reasons for that. The first is that she's really clearly shown in the show to be right at the center of Aes Sedai politics, and as kind of a rival to Moiraine. And both of those fit Elaida to a T in the books, and neither one of those really fits Liandrin in the books. The Liandrin in the show is really the only red sister in the show so far with speaking lines or any real characterization, and Elaida is just far more important to the main narrative than Liandrin. So for those reasons, I kind of suspect, especially when we saw her meeting with the Amyrlin, I suspected that, her sort of involvement in Aes Sedai politics, that this was someone who was going to take on more of kind of Elaida's role from the story in the books. But most importantly, I think that the cold open to the very first episode is a clue that we are looking at someone based largely on Elaida. However, to sort of understand that, we're going to have to do a bit of a deep dive into sort of book lore. So, if you remember that cold open, we see these two men running. We see the Red Sisters on horses, and they're kind of running him down. They catch up to him, and we find out that this guy it's one guy, and he's going crazy. So the other guy is just sort of hallucinating them. And then Liandrin herself goes over and personally gentles him on the spot. We don't really know what that means at this point in the show if you're just watching the show, but later we find out that that's what's happened. She's cut him off for the one power, and we learn later on with Logain that there's really terrible consequences for doing that. That once a man is cut off from the one power, or woman, it basically sort of plunges them into this suicidal depression that many of them don't survive. So we see that in the cold open, and it's very, I imagine if you are just watching the show and hadn't read the books, it'd be kind of hard to understand what's going on there without much context. But we later learn that that there are rumors that the Red Sisters are doing this all over, not just with this one guy, but there are rumors that they're doing this a lot. And then, having seen that cold open, we know that there's some truth to the rumors. We also learn that it is against Tower law, and Swan Sanche makes that very clear in episode 6, and Liandrin looks like she's going to face a penalty for having done what she's done. And so, all of this, all of these events, men being gentled without being brought to Tar-Valon, which is what the law says. They need to be brought and given trial and then gentled. All of this happening is referring to something very specific in the books, and it's called the vileness. It's kind of informally called the vileness. It's based on a quote by a character named Codswain. And she asks two Aes Sedai sisters named Marana and Honora if they were, quote, if they were involved with, quote, that vileness after the Aiel War, end quote. And so from that, it's just sort of, in Wheel of Time lore, it's taken on sort of the capital name, the vileness, but it's never referred to that in the books. It's just Codswain sort of offhandedly referring to it as a vileness. So the Aiel War, if you remember the super awesome battle that happened at the end of at the beginning of episode 7, the cold open, we saw that amazing battle. This woman who is pregnant and in labor and manages to put that on hold several times to just completely obliterate, I think, 6 different soldiers that come after her. So that's what we're watching. That was the Aiel War. And we learned in episode 6 that Swan and Moraine heard a prophecy about the dragon reborn, about the dragon being reborn, from an Aes Sedai sister named Gitara Morosa. What we don't learn in the show, but we learn in the books, is that when that prophecy was said, for one thing, as soon as Gitara Moroso uttered that prophecy, she immediately dropped dead. So apparently it was this really powerful prophecy, is the way that it's implied in the book. That would be New Spring, by the way, which is a prequel to the main series. And the other thing that we don't learn in the show, but we know from the books, is that the only other person in the room was the Amerlin seat of the time, a woman named Tamra Ospania. And so we have these 4 people who know, because of this this prophecy, this power of foretelling, these 4 people who are made aware in an instant that the dragon has been reborn, which is a pretty big deal. And one of those people immediately drops dead. That would be Gitara Morosa. And then you have these 2 youngsters, Swan and Moraine, who are really only there because they're kind of waiting on the Amerlin and this esteemed older Aes Sedai. So they're there almost kind of accidentally. And then, of course, the Amerlin seat, who immediately sets about sending people to search for a baby that was just born on the slopes of Dragonmount, which is where the prophecies say the dragon's going to be reborn. And so, and of course, swears Moiraine and Swan to secrecy. And so here is where we get stuff that is sort of implied in the books, and it's also made a little bit more clear in some of Robert Jordan's notes and things like the Wheel of Time Compendium, different sort of Wheel of Time apocrypha. And you can kind of, piece this together from several sources. I read about a lot of this stuff on a blog called the 13th Depository, which is really the greatest Wheel of Time blog ever. It's on Blogspot, so if you just search for 13th Depository, you will find literally every piece of information you could ever find about the Wheel of Time. And so here, what happens is that shortly after this prophecy, the Black Ajah, which are Aes Sedai who are secretly serving the Dark One, they capture the Amerlin seat, Tamra Ospenia. They put her to the question, and they discover that the dragon's been reborn. And then they murder her. And so now we have only two sisters who know that the dragon has been reborn. And they're not, in fact, sisters yet. It's Swan and Moraine, but they're still accepted. And we have the Black Aja. So these are sisters who are in the tower who are secretly serving the Dark One. And they come up with this plan where they are basically going to kill or gentle. They're going to gentle as many men who can channel as possible. And they're going to kill any man who could possibly have been born on Dragonmount. And they're going to do this because if the dragon reborn has been gentled, then he cannot defeat the Dark One at the last battle. So this is their pretty straightforward plan that kind of makes sense. And so they go about putting this in motion. And, of course, they have to keep a secret that they are the Black Aja, that they are serving the Dark One. And so they all lead these kind of double lives. So they also, in addition to being Black Aja, they also have a regular Aja that they are part of. And many of the key figures here are part of the Red Aja, whose job it is to hunt down men who can channel anyway. And so we get this weird confluence of, the sinister behind-the-scenes influence of the Black, and the, I don't know if I'd call it sinister, but certainly, it's a bit of a bloodthirsty aspect to what the Reds do with hunting down men. And so they go on a pogrom. And what they're doing is they're hunting down men. They're gentling them on the spot, which is a violation of Tower law. And in many cases, they are killing them as well. And it's very intertwined in terms of whether it's being directed by Black sisters or by Red sisters, who are just kind of going along with this because this is right up their alley anyway. Their whole reason for existing is to gentle men who can channel. So, this is something that they are easy to convince. Even if they're not Black sisters, it's easy to convince them to go along with this. And so this goes on for a certain amount of time. And then eventually the Amerlin who precedes Swan Sanche as Amerlin, the Amerlin right before her, don't have her name handy, but she's a fairly strong Amerlin. She becomes aware of what's going on, and she sort of puts a stop to it. The Red Aja becomes very tight-lipped about it, and so this was a moment where it's possible to have exposed the Black Aja, but unfortunately the Red Aja refuses to share any information about who was directing any of this, and so the Amerlin was left with no real alternative. She exiles the three sitters in the hall for the Red Aja, basically puts the blame on them, exiles the three of them to farms to basically do farm work as penance for the rest of their lives, and that's sort of the end of it. So the Black Aja's involvement never really gets exposed. And that, in a nutshell, is what the vileness was. This sort of period of wild, lawless gentling of men who could channel. So, if we get back to what we're seeing in the show, this is exactly what we see in the very first moments of the show. We see this poor guy, he's being, I don't know, who knows what he's done, but he's being run down by these women on horseback. They catch him, they gentle him. We later learn from seeing Logain that, being gentled is not something that you want to have happen. There's no trial, there's no taking him to Tar Valon. It's really kind of, this sort of brutal quasi-execution that's just sort of happening on the spot. That, in the books, that is exactly what that is. It is the vileness, for lack of a more explicit term. Okay, so how does this relate to Liandrin and Elaida? Well, for one thing, Liandrin was not involved in the vileness at all. which is quite interesting because she is both a red sister and a black sister in the books. She is Black Aja, secretly serving the Dark One. So this would definitely be right up her alley. However, she doesn't become a full sister until after it's all over. She becomes a full sister the year after Swan Sanche becomes Amerlin's seat. And so at this point, the vileness is kind of long over. Not long over, but it's been the previous Amerlin. Remember, the Amerlin before Swan Sanche is the one who put an end to it. And so by the time Swan takes the Amerlin's seat, the vileness is over. And Liandrin only becomes a full sister the following year. So she has no connection to this, even though, like I said, ideologically it is right up her alley. Conversely, Elaida is involved in the vileness. And in fact, the one thing we know explicitly that she did was that she was involved in gentling the nephew of Tom Marilyn, who is the bard in the show that makes friends with Matt. We see way too little of him in the show, although I'm sure he'll be back for season 2. But he does mention the story when he is talking to Rand, when he suspects that Matt might be able to channel. He's telling Rand the story, and it's basically the same story from the books. You know, he was off being a court bard in Andor. I don't know if they say that in the show. He says he's off doing something, but in the books he's being court bard and he's courting the Queen of Andor. And while this is happening, Elaida and some Reds show up. They gentle his nephew. They leave him on the spot, and he ends up dead, I believe, by suicide relatively soon thereafter. And this is a big part of Tom's motivation. It is why in the books he is constantly helping these young boys from Emmons Field. And in the show it's kind of implied that that's why he's helping Matt and Rand, even though Matt in particular is not being a particularly pleasant person at the time. And so, you know, that's an important connection, but it's also very explicit. The vileness exists in the source material. Elaida is a part of it. She commits one of these lawless gentlings, and Liandrin does not. And so to me, that is a big clue. Like right there, the Liandrin from the show is already doing something that Liandrin from the books does not do, and Elaida from the books does do. And so that's to me, that's a big hint that we're looking at an amalgam character that's going to be similar to the Eamon Valda character. He's going to be, or she is going to be, doing different things. They could kind of be mashed together. I mean, that will be complicated because, as a lot of people have pointed out, it's really important to Liandrin's character in the book that she's Black Aja. That's central to who she is in the books. It's very important in the books that Elaida is not Black Aja. Not that Elaida is awesome. She's actually far from it. But she is nasty in a way that has nothing to do with allegiance to the Dark One, and just has to do with her being kind of a nasty person. So, if they're going to be an amalgam character, there's a question of, is this show Liandrin Black Aja or not? Personally, if I had to put money on it right now, I would guess that she will not be Black Aja. And I really believe that it is going to be mainly Elaida. I think we're going to see Liandrin in the show on the Amerlin seat. Sorry if that's a spoiler for people who only watch the show. But I think we're going to see her basically take the path, the general path that Elaida takes through the books. Now, obviously, this is just a shot in the dark. You know, I could see it going the other way. But I did notice that cold open, and the more I thought about it, I really had this, you know, it's a hunch, an intuition that that's where they're going with this character. So, Anyway, so thinking about all that, I drew this picture of Elaida. She is a deeply unstable character in a really fascinating way. She has intense paranoia. In the books, she has megalomania. Um, in sort of a more archaic time, we would just simply refer to her as insane. Um, but these days, I mean, if we were going to say what's actually going on with her, there's definitely some sort of psychosis going on um, that only grows as the series goes, and she has just a really fascinating arc from beginning to end. She has kind of a sort of a poetic ending in the story where she exits the narrative, um, and is one that I always found fascinating. So this is my portrait of her in my quest to draw every single character in the Wheel of Time, which is probably impossible. I believe the official count is 2,780 named characters. So probably not going to get to all of them, but I like to keep checking them off, especially when I'm sort of twiddling my thumbs and waiting for season 2. So thanks for watching. If you want to share your thoughts in the comments, that would be awesome. I'd be fascinated to know what you think.